Chapter 26. Daniel walked back into the cavern. He did not seem to be concerned with seeing the moon in one piece. He was concerned by the number of beds with sick or dying patients that filled the cavern. "Is this it?" he whispered to himself. He walked quickly to a nearby patient and woke him. "Why are you here?" asked Daniel. "The sleeping sickness," said the patient. "I'm burning up." Daniel touched the man's forehead and confirmed it was quite warm. "Have you been quarantined?" asked Daniel. "No," said the patient in a drowsy voice. "It's genetic." Daniel's eyes widened. A disease that affects an entire group based on genetics represented a significant issue. Of course, putting them in a cave to lower their temperatures was a simple treatment, but he suspected that it also kept a large number of individuals out of public view. He rubbed his chin as he looked around and considered what he was seeing. "What is happening to these people?" asked Sig. "Apparently it is genetic," said Daniel. "What does that mean?" asked Sig. "It means that we haven't been infected with some disease," said Daniel, "but these people need help." Sig wanted to tell him that they would be back, but he knew better than to think that Daniel would leave them. He sighed softly. "You were right, Sig," said Daniel in a low voice. "This is destiny." Sig looked him in the eye. In Sig's experience, Daniel had only spoken in such a clear and solemn tone when he had invited him to seek out the divine keys. "Well, we still have to find Erica Lawrence," said Sig, "and in this age we hopefully won't need a healer as much as these people." "You'll let me stay?" asked Daniel with a bit of relief in his voice. Sig smiled and nodded. "Very well," said Daniel. "After you've finished your investigation, you will know where to find me." Sig smiled and waved as he returned to the others outside the cave, as Daniel turned to the thousands of individuals in beds throughout the cool cavern. "So does anyone know how we are going to find Erica Lawrence?" asked Sig. "I do," said Lucas as he held up his key. After a few moments, he put the chain carrying his key back into his shirt. "So?" asked Sig anxiously. "Records say that she wanted to be left alone after her husband died, so she kept her whereabouts private," said Lucas with a frown. "Any other ideas?" asked Sig. "I have one," said Jonathan as he held up his key. Jonathan's eyes began glowing brightly. Suddenly he fell to the ground unconscious. Kirana and Stephanie rushed to ensure he was okay. After they verified that he was still breathing, they gave each other disapproving looks. Neither one of them liked the other being so close to Jonathan. "Any other ideas?" asked Sig hopefully. "Just let Jonathan have the time he needs," said Stephanie through her tablet. "He'll find her, and we need rest anyway." "She's right about that," said Lizard with air quotes. He yawned. The yawn seemed contagious, and before long everyone that was conscious except for row 82 yawned. "All right," said Sig. "Who's on watch first?" After a brief discussion, Kirana and Stephanie were put on watch. Each of them wanted to be there with Jonathan when he woke up. They sat awake, splitting their attention between row 82, Jonathan, and each other, but said nothing. As the women watched the others sleep, Jonathan walked in the mind realm. He was surprised by the number of people that were close around him. It seemed crowded as he traveled. He finally decided it was time to stop someone and ask for directions. He walked up to a man that appeared to be singing to himself. "Excuse me," said Jonathan, "do you know where Erica Lawrence is?" "How would I know?" asked the man. "She left the Council of Nine, and if you ask me, something has been off ever since." "Left the Council of Nine?" asked Jonathan. "Why?" "The traitor with the soul key," the man replied. Jonathan gasped. Though he did not really know anything about the previous key bearer, he found it hard to believe that someone with the power of a divine key would become a traitor. Suddenly a cloaked man appeared behind him. "Hey!" shouted the man angrily. "You can't come back here." Jonathan turned around to see the cloaked figure rushing toward him. As he ran, he drew a straight sword and prepared to slash Jonathan. Jonathan got out his key to defend himself. In an instant, he had a glowing katana in his hands. As the cloaked man noticed the glowing blade, he skidded to a stop and drew back defensively. "You," started the man. "Wait, who are you?" "Who are you?" retorted Jonathan. "And what do you mean by rushing at me with a weapon drawn?" "You're Jonathan Knight," said the man as he pulled his hood back. The man looked exactly like Victor Lee. "I wasn't expecting you yet." "Victor," said Jonathan. "Why do you keep saying that?" asked Victor. "Oh, right," said Jonathan. "You just look like Victor." "Well, what are you doing here?" asked Victor suspiciously. "I'm looking for Erica Lawrence," said Jonathan. "Now why would you even know that name?" asked Victor. "And why would you be looking for her? How do I know that you're really Jonathan Knight?" Well, I'm looking for her because Stephanie Mason said that we needed to find her," said Jonathan. "Stephanie Mason?" said Victor in shock. "Well, there's no way that Joshua Beckman would know that name." "Joshua Beckman?" asked Jonathan. "Yes," said Victor. "He was the bearer of the soul key, but sadly he did not heed my advice." "About relying too much on the key?" asked Jonathan. "Yes," said Victor in a confused tone. "How did you know?" "What happened to him?" asked Jonathan, ignoring Victor's question. "Well, he came here to escape and eventually went insane," said Victor. "Escape?" asked Jonathan. "From what?" "Love," said Victor. "He was in love." Jonathan scratched the back of his head awkwardly. He did not know how to respond. Finally he spoke. "So, do you know where Erica Lawrence is?" asked Jonathan. "Well, she's in a small town to the south," said Victor, "but I don't know that she'll be of much help to you." "I don't know what we need from her either," said Jonathan with a shrug. "But Stephanie convinced Sig that it was important, and if Sig thinks it's important, everyone tends to go along with it." "Sig?" asked Victor. "Oh, Siegfried West," clarified Jonathan. "Everyone calls him Sig, though." Victor laughed softly. "Yeah, he's a lot more persuasive than Drew Baker," said Victor. "Drew Baker?" asked Jonathan. "The current bearer of the Heaven Shield Key," clarified Victor. "Siegfried has a more positive outlook." While it was odd to hear someone referring to Sig by his actual name, Jonathan knew they were referring to the same person. "Thank you, Victor," said Jonathan. "Victor?" asked Victor. "Who is Victor?" started Jonathan. He paused and thought about how to describe him. If this Victor was correct, then the 9th and final key would not belong to Victor Lee. It would belong to Sig. Jonathan thought about what Victor's role was in their group. "He's a really nice guy," said Jonathan at last. "I guess he's just coming along with us out of the goodness of his heart." "Admirable," said Victor. "I am always impressed by those who are willing to sacrifice for their friends." "Well," said Jonathan with a smile, "maybe he really likes Jennifer Cedar." Victor's face went pale. "Jennifer Cedar?" asked Victor. "How does she feel about him?" "Well, to be honest, I'm no expert in these things," said Jonathan, "but I get the impression that she likes him a lot." Victor stood silently pondering what Jonathan had said. Jonathan felt awkward, as he had thought these details were trivial. In that moment of awkward silence, the mind realm evaporated from around him, and Jonathan stirred. Stephanie and Kirana went up to him to see how he was doing. "Small town to the south," said Jonathan. He immediately closed his eyes and began sleeping. Stephanie and Kirana looked at one another in confusion. "Sounds like we can get some sleep," said Kirana. Stephanie nodded and gave a slight smile. They had been up for quite a while, and after going through the mine, fighting Augments and Felix Light, and then waiting for Jonathan to recover, they were ready for sleep. Lucas and Victor took the watch shift as Stephanie and Kirana prepared to sleep. Lucas and Victor yawned, but the sight of the full moon gave them renewed energy. "It's quite impressive," said Victor at last. "My parents told me stories about the golden times when the moon was whole, but I never imagined it would be so perfectly round." Lucas smiled. "I bet all the people here just take it for granted, too," said Lucas. Victor smiled. They sat in silence for a few moments before Lucas spoke again. "Victor, who are you?" asked Lucas. His question threw Victor off guard. Victor Lee?" said Victor in a confused voice. "Before I learned about the mines and the foothills," said Lucas, "Stephanie told me not to use my key like a tool, but to let it speak to me." "I recall," said Victor, prompting Lucas to clarify. "In my mind, I could see the mountains as they are here," said Lucas. "But before that, someone came to me and helped me." Lucas turned to Victor. "He looked exactly like you." "What?" said Victor. "He told me that he was not you, but that he looked just like you," said Lucas. "Why would that be?" "I don't know," said Victor. "And after seeing row 82 with a key, I no longer even think I'm a key bearer at all. There's only one more key, and if I were to put credits on it, I would say that Sig is the one to get Heaven's Shield." "I would agree," said Lucas, "but I've been thinking a lot about what Sig said, about destiny. I can't help but think that if he's right, then there has to be a reason that you are here with us too." "I don't know," said Victor. "Maybe it's coincidence that I'm here, and that you are the ones with the destiny. Either way, I do believe that if I can help save the world from the Destroyer, even if I only help a little bit, I should still try. I owe it to my parents." "Maybe," said Lucas. "Maybe you just want to go along with Jennifer Cedar." Victor blushed slightly. "She's very kind and very beautiful," said Victor. "I think any interest she has in me is limited to friendship." "I don't think so," said Lucas. "She's not nearly as kind to everyone else as she is to you." Victor blushed a bit more. "I don't want to get my hopes up," said Victor. "She's way too good for a guy like me." Lucas smiled and shook his head. He actually thought that she was lazy and undependable in many cases, and that Victor probably deserved a girl who was better, or at least one who required less maintenance. "Anyway," said Lucas, "you can't think of any reason why you would be associated with the Divine Keys?" "I can't think of anything you don't already know," said Victor. "I'm not the only one who heard the legends and dreamed of using divine power to stop the demon worshippers and augments." Stephanie woke up as Victor said the word augments. She sat up and looked around. After confirming that row 82 was asleep, she saw Victor and Lucas talking. She walked over to them and pulled out her tablet. "Hello," she said. "Sorry to wake you, Stephanie," said Victor. "It's okay," replied Stephanie. "I can't sleep with that augment hanging around." She looked over to row 82 and narrowed her eyes. "I know what you mean," said Victor. He was also a bit apprehensive about his desire to join their group. Lucas seemed uninterested in that. "Stephanie, may I ask you a question?" asked Lucas. Stephanie nodded. "How did you know about me using my key like a tool?" he asked. She lowered her head. She was debating whether or not to answer that question. Finally, she gave a look of apathy and typed a response. "Victor told me," she said. "I don't remember telling you," said Victor. "Well, it wasn't actually Victor, but someone that looked just like him," said Stephanie. Victor's eyes grew wide. He turned and looked at Lucas. His eyes were also wide. "What am I missing?" asked Stephanie, who was confused by their reaction. "I saw someone who looked like Victor as I used my key to find the mine," said Lucas in a somber tone. Stephanie's eyes grew wide. She turned to Victor as she typed. "Who are you, Victor?" she asked. "I," started Victor. He stopped, though, because he had absolutely no idea what to say, let alone why he was appearing in visions of divine key bearers.